Tonight does not require effort. Nothing is being asked of you. There is no lesson to complete, no idea to master, no improvement to make before rest is allowed. This is not a moment for clarity. It is a moment for release. Long before philosophy became something that was studied, debated, or taught, it was something that was lived. For the Stoics, philosophy was not a system designed to impress the mind. It was a way to reduce friction between the individual and the world. They were not interested in making life feel larger. They were interested in making it lighter. As the day comes to a close, the mind often behaves as if it is still responsible for what has already passed. It revisits conversations. It replays moments. It attempts to correct outcomes that are no longer present. The Stoics noticed this tendency with great precision. They observed that much of human unrest comes not from events themselves, but from the belief that the mind must continue to manage them. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the most influential Stoic thinkers, began his teachings with a simple distinction, a distinction so basic that it can be overlooked, and yet so profound that it can quietly reorganize the inner life. He said that some things are within our control and some things are not. This was not a motivational idea. It was not meant to empower the ego. It was meant to limit it. According to Epictetus, what belongs to us is very small. Our judgments, our intentions, our willingness or unwillingness to act in accordance with reason. Everything else, the body, reputation, outcomes, the behavior of others, the unfolding of events, exists outside our authority. This distinction was not designed to make a person passive. It was designed to make a person free, because the mind suffers most intensely when it attempts to govern what was never placed in its care. As you prepare for sleep, there is no need to actively apply this idea. There is no task here, only a gentle noticing. Notice how the day naturally separates itself when effort is no longer applied. Some moments feel complete, others remain unresolved. The Stoic approach is not to force resolution. It is to recognize ownership. Ask nothing of the day. Simply observe. What happened today that required your intention? And what happened that unfolded entirely on its own? The Stoics would say that peace begins when the mind stops claiming responsibility for what it could never have controlled, not as a resignation, but as an alignment with reality. Marcus Aurelius, writing privately to himself late at night, often reminded his own mind of this truth, not with comfort, but with clarity. He observed that the world does not pause for individual preference. Events move according to causes far larger than any single perspective. And yet, within this vast movement, there is a small space that remains untouched by circumstance. The inner posture, the manner in which the mind meets what arrives. This and only this is where freedom exists. At night, the illusion of control often weakens on its own. The body grows heavy, attention loosens. This is not a failure of will. It is a return to proportion. There is no need to carry the structure of the day into sleep. The Stoics did not believe the mind should remain vigilant at all times. They believed it should rest when rest is appropriate. To continue managing what is no longer present is not discipline. It is confusion. Release does not mean forgetting. It means setting down what was never yours to hold. Let the mind recognize the boundary. What belongs to tomorrow can remain there. What belonged to today no longer requires attention. There is no reward for continued effort now, no outcome that can be improved in the dark. The Stoics would say that rest is not an escape from responsibility. It is the natural conclusion of right measure, As the world quiets, notice how little is actually required of you in this moment. Breathing continues without instruction. The heart maintains its rhythm without supervision. The same is true of the larger order of things. Nothing collapses if the mind becomes still. Nothing is lost if control is released. This understanding was not meant to be dramatic. It was meant to be stabilizing, a reminder that the universe does not need constant correction, and neither do you. There is a quiet confusion the mind often carries. It mistakes involvement for responsibility. It assumes that because something touched the day, it must now be carried through the night. The Stoics made a careful distinction here. They observed that being present in an event does not mean being accountable for its outcome. To witness something is not the same as to own it. Much of the mind's restlessness comes from this subtle misunderstanding. Responsibility, in the Stoic sense, was never about outcomes. It was about orientation, about how the inner faculty responds, not about how the world resolves itself. Seneca wrote often about this hidden burden people place upon themselves. He noticed that individuals exhaust themselves not through action, but through the afterlife of action, through the mental rehearsal of what could have been said differently, what might have altered the result. For the Stoic, this was unnecessary labor. Once an action has been taken with clarity and restraint, it no longer belongs to the present moment. It dissolves back into the order of events. What remains is not responsibility, but memory. And memory does not require supervision. At night, the mind often attempts to correct what has already settled. It returns to moments that have lost their ability to change, not because change is possible, but because the mind has not yet released its claim. The Stoics would say that this is not diligence. It is a misplacement of care. Care belongs to intention, not to result. You are responsible for the posture with which you acted, not for how the world received it. This idea was never meant to excuse indifference. It was meant to prevent unnecessary self-punishment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the universe unfolds according to its own coherence. Individual actions enter this coherence briefly, then pass through. They do not remain suspended waiting for approval. When night arrives, there is no Stoic requirement to continue holding the day together. The work of responsibility ends where intention ends. What follows is not negligence, but proportion. Consider how many thoughts return simply because they have not been formally released, not because they demand attention, but because the mind assumes it is still on duty. The Stoics did not believe the mind was meant to operate without pause. They believed that clarity includes knowing when to step back. There is no virtue in mental exhaustion, no wisdom in carrying what no longer belongs to you. Responsibility does not grow by repetition. It does not strengthen by rumination. It fulfills itself quietly, then withdraws. As the body settles, allow the distinction to soften the mind. What you chose with care is complete. What unfolded beyond that care was never yours. There is no need to rehearse correctness now, no verdict to deliver. The Stoics understood that peace often appears not when answers are found, but when claims are relinquished. Nothing further is required of you in this moment. The world continues without consulting your thoughts, and it does so without harm. This was not a threat in Stoic philosophy. It was a comfort, a reminder that responsibility has a natural boundary, and that boundary has already been reached tonight. As the mind begins to loosen its grip on responsibility, another habit quietly appears, the habit of reopening what has already ended. Events conclude in time, but the mind often refuses their conclusion. It returns to them, not because they are unfinished, but because the mind has not yet accepted their stillness. The Stoics paid close attention to this tendency. They noticed that much of human unrest does not come from what is happening, but from what the mind insists on continuing. An event once complete no longer possesses momentum. It does not move. It does not demand revision. Only the mind keeps it active. Epictetus described this as a confusion between reality and impression. The event belongs to the past. The impression keeps it present. This is not a flaw of character, it is a habit of attention. When something ends, the body understands it more easily than the mind. The body releases. The mind replays. Stoic practice was never about forcing the mind to stop. It was about allowing things to remain where they already are. Finished, not corrected, not improved, not judged, simply complete. The Stoics believed that peace increases when the mind learns to respect endings, to recognize when something no longer requires interpretation. At night, this becomes especially important. The mind often treats rest as an opportunity to revisit the day, as if quiet were an invitation to analysis, but silence does not ask questions. It answers them by removing urgency. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the past has no power except what the mind lends it. Once an event has passed, it exists only as memory, and memory does not command action. To continue working on what is finished is not care. It is resistance to closure. Stoic thought does not demand that memories disappear. It asks only that they be allowed to rest in their proper place. Nothing more is required of them. As the night deepens, notice how many thoughts arise without necessity. They do not arrive with urgency. They arrive out of habit. There is no need to push them away. There is no need to follow them. Let them take their natural position, behind you. The Stoics would say that the present moment becomes lighter when it is no longer crowded by what has already ended. What is finished does not need supervision. The world has already moved on. You may allow yourself to do the same. There is no loss in letting events remain complete, only a quiet return to proportion. And in that proportion, rest becomes possible. As events are allowed to remain finished, the mind often searches for a new task. If nothing requires action, it creates commentary. This is one of the mind's oldest habits, the belief that silence must be filled, that every moment must be interpreted, that attention is only useful when it is active. The Stoics understood this tendency well. They observed that the mind often confuses awareness with obligation. It assumes that noticing something requires responding to it, that a thought's appearance assigns it importance. But Stoic philosophy makes a quieter distinction. Not every thought is a duty. Not every impression requires engagement. Epictetus described impressions as visitors. They arrive uninvited. They present themselves, but they do not demand hospitality. The error begins when the mind assumes it is responsible for entertaining each one. This sense of mental duty, the feeling that the mind must explain, evaluate, or resolve, is not wisdom. It is habit. At night, this habit becomes more noticeable. The body withdraws from action, but the mind continues to assign itself work. It reviews, it labels, it comments, as if rest were incomplete without explanation. The Stoics did not believe the mind was meant to narrate reality at all times. They believed that reason includes restraint. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind does not owe commentary to the world, that many things pass by correctly when left unexamined. Judgment, in Stoic thought, is a choice, not an automatic requirement. To notice a thought does not mean to endorse it. To experience a feeling does not mean to analyze it. The illusion of mental duty convinces the mind that disengagement is neglect, but Stoic practice reveals the opposite. Peace often appears when the mind steps aside, not because something was solved, but because something was no longer treated as a task. At night, the absence of duty is not a void, it is a return to proportion. There is no Stoic obligation to make sense of the day before sleep, no requirement to assign meaning. Meaning emerges when the mind is rested, not when it is exhausted. As thoughts arise, allow them to pass without appointment. They do not need to be scheduled. They do not require response. The Stoics believed that the mind is most accurate when it is least strained. Silence does not indicate neglect. It indicates trust. Trust that reality continues without commentary. Trust that understanding does not collapse when explanation pauses. The mind may rest from its self-appointed duties. Nothing essential is lost when the inner voice grows quiet. What remains is awareness without effort. And in that space, sleep does not need to be earned. It arrives naturally, when the mind finally recognizes that it is no longer required to be on duty. As the sense of mental duty softens, something subtle becomes noticeable. Not a new thought, but the brief stillness that appears before one forms. The Stoics paid careful attention to this space. They understood that the mind does not move in a single, continuous stream. It moves in intervals, moments where nothing has yet been claimed. Between one impression and the next, there is a pause that often goes unnoticed. This pause is not emptiness, it is neutrality. Epictetus taught that impressions arrive on their own. They are not chosen. They are not summoned. What follows the impression, however, is optional. There is a small distance between what appears and what the mind decides to do with it. Most of the time, this distance collapses instantly. The mind moves forward without noticing the space at all. But when attention relaxes, the space begins to widen. At night, this widening happens naturally. Thoughts slow, impressions lose urgency. The mind no longer rushes to meet them. This is not detachment. It is proportion returning. The Stoics did not believe peace required the absence of thoughts. They believed it required freedom from immediacy. A thought may appear, but it does not need to be followed. A feeling may arise, but it does not need to be explained. In the quiet space between impressions, the mind is present without being involved. Marcus Aurelius described this state as standing slightly back from oneself, not in resistance, not in judgment, but in gentle observation. From this position, thoughts lose their authority. They continue to pass, but they no longer command movement. There is no effort required to maintain this space. Effort causes it to disappear. The space exists when the mind is no longer trying to manage itself. Notice how impressions begin to soften when they are not immediately answered. They fade more quickly. They leave less residue. The Stoics understood that this space is always available. It does not need to be created. It only needs to be recognized. At night, the recognition becomes easier because the world asks less. No decisions are pending. No responses are expected. The mind is free to remain open without direction. In this openness, there is rest, not because the mind has stopped, but because it has stopped hurrying. The space between impressions does not require guarding. It remains as long as the mind does not intrude. There is nothing to fix here, nothing to hold, just a quiet interval where awareness rests without leaning forward. As this space becomes familiar, sleep approaches without instruction, not as something to achieve, but as something that naturally follows when the mind is no longer compelled to respond. You do not need to stay with this space. You do not need to remember it. It will remain whether noticed or not. And in its quiet presence, the mind is finally allowed to drift. As the space between impressions becomes familiar, another realization quietly settles in. Nothing is missing. The Stoics spoke often about desire, but not as something dramatic or dangerous. They saw it as a simple miscalculation, the belief that the present moment is incomplete. According to Stoic thought, most restlessness is not caused by suffering, but by the assumption that something more is required. More certainty, more resolution, more preparation for what comes next. But the present moment does not make requests. It does not ask to be improved before it can be inhabited. Seneca observed that people are often exhausted not by what they endure, but by what they believe they still need. The future becomes a container for imagined requirements. At night, these requirements lose their urgency, not because they were fulfilled, but because they were never real demands to begin with. The Stoics believed that sufficiency is not something to be achieved. It is something to be recognized. Enoughness does not announce itself loudly. It appears quietly when comparison ends. In this moment, there is no need to evaluate where you should be, no standard to measure against. The present moment stands on its own. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the universe does not rush, and that nothing essential is delayed. What is needed arrives when it arrives. What is not present was never required. The mind often resists this idea because it has been trained to anticipate. But anticipation is unnecessary when nothing is being demanded. In the stillness of night, notice how little the moment requires from you. Breathing continues, the body adjusts. Awareness remains. Nothing else is necessary. The Stoics did not equate contentment with satisfaction. They saw it as alignment, being where you are, without leaning forward, without waiting for permission to rest. Enoughness is not resignation. It is clarity. The clarity that this moment does not need to become something else in order to be complete. As attention settles into this understanding, the sense of urgency dissolves further. There is no unfinished requirement hidden beneath the surface, no task quietly waiting to be remembered. The present moment has already accounted for itself. You are not late. Nothing has been overlooked. The Stoics trusted the natural order because they understood that excess effort creates imbalance. Rest in this sense is not indulgence. It is the correct response to a moment that needs nothing. As the mind recognizes enoughness, it releases its reach. And when reaching ends, rest begins. Not because something was added, but because nothing more was required. As the sense of enoughness settles, the mind no longer searches outward. There is nothing it needs to reach for, nothing it needs to complete. In this quiet, another perception becomes clear. Being alone is not the same as being without. The Stoics understood solitude in a way that did not depend on others. For them, solitude was not a condition created by absence. It was a state created by sufficiency. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that a person can withdraw inward without becoming isolated, that the mind carries its own place of rest. When activity fades, the world becomes less crowded, not because it has emptied, but because the need for constant contact has softened. At night, this softening happens naturally. There are fewer voices, fewer demands. The mind notices the space around it, and sometimes mistakes this space for loss. But space is not lack, it is room. The Stoics did not fear being alone, because they did not equate presence with reassurance. They trusted the stability of the inner posture. In solitude, nothing needs to be explained, nothing needs to be shared. Awareness may rest without audience. This is not withdrawal from life. It is a return to proportion. The world remains available, but it does not require engagement. As the body lies still, notice how little depends on connection in this moment. Breathing continues. The heart keeps its rhythm. Life does not pause because attention turns inward. There is no danger in this quiet separation, no falling away. The Stoics believed that a person is never truly alone when they are aligned with what is present. Loneliness arises when the mind insists on comparison, when it measures this moment against another time, another place, another presence. But comparison has already softened. There is nothing to measure against now. This moment stands complete. Solitude becomes gentle when it is no longer resisted. It becomes a shelter rather than a distance. There is no need to fill this space, no need to bring anything closer. What is here is sufficient. As this understanding settles, the sense of separation dissolves, not because something arrived, but because nothing was missing. In this quiet companionship with oneself, the mind finds no edge, no boundary that needs to be crossed, only a steady, unremarkable presence that does not require confirmation. From here, rest deepens naturally, not as retreat, but as ease. As solitude becomes gentle, the mind no longer presses against the moment. There is nothing it needs to argue with, nothing it needs to resist. Acceptance, in Stoic thought, was never surrender. It was the absence of friction. The Stoics understood that much of human strain comes from quiet opposition, not dramatic refusal, but the subtle sense that something should be different. This sense does not always speak. Sometimes it simply tightens. At night, the tightening loosens. The body rests, and with it, the impulse to correct. Acceptance begins here, not as a decision but as a release of objection. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that events unfold according to their nature, not according to preference. To accept this was not to approve, but to stop resisting what already is. Resistance requires energy, acceptance does not. It allows the moment to remain as it is without commentary. This is not passivity. It is accuracy, seeing the moment clearly without adding pressure. As attention settles, notice how the urge to change fades when nothing is demanded. There is no improvement required right now, no adjustment waiting to be made. The Stoics did not believe peace came from control. They believed it came from alignment. Alignment with what is present, not with what is imagined. In this alignment, the mind no longer leans away. It rests where it is. Acceptance does not close possibilities. It quiets insistence. The moment does not need agreement to continue. It only needs to be allowed. As the night deepens, the mind may notice how natural this allowance feels. There is no effort involved, no achievement, just the quiet absence of resistance. Nothing is being conceded, nothing is being lost. The moment stands unopposed, and in this lack of opposition, rest deepens on its own. The Stoics trusted that when resistance ends, balance returns without instruction. There is nothing further to accept, nothing to finalize. The mind may remain open without direction, without stance. From here, sleep approaches not because something was resolved, but because nothing is being held against what is. As resistance fades and the moment no longer asks to be changed, another understanding settles gently into place. The world continues, not because it is pushed, not because it is managed, but because it is ordered in its own way. The Stoics trusted this order. They did not imagine the universe as something fragile, waiting for constant attention. They understood it as something stable, moving according to principles larger than any single effort. At night, this becomes easier to feel. The body rests and yet breathing continues. The heart maintains its rhythm without instruction. The same quiet reliability exists beyond the body. Stars do not require supervision. Seasons do not pause for readiness. Life unfolds whether it is observed or not. The Stoics believed that much anxiety comes from overestimating one's role, from the assumption that withdrawal causes collapse. But nothing essential depends on continued effort. When attention softens, the world does not falter, it steadies. This is not insignificance, it is proportion. Understanding that one may rest without consequence. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the whole is not endangered by the stillness of its parts. What moves, moves. What rests, rests. Both belong. There is no obligation to remain alert for the sake of order. Order does not require vigilance. It sustains itself through coherence, not through control. As this recognition deepens, the sense of responsibility lightens further, not because responsibility was denied, but because it was placed correctly, where it belongs, outside the need for constant presence. There is no loss in stepping back, no absence created. The world remains intact when the mind releases its claim. This understanding does not demand belief. It arrives quietly, as something already known. As the night continues, allow the sense of effort to recede completely. Nothing waits for instruction now. Nothing depends on readiness. The order that carries the world forward does so without needing your attention, and in that assurance, rest becomes effortless. Not because the world has stopped, but because it does not require holding. As effort withdraws completely, there is nothing left to organize, nothing left to place. The order that carries the world does not require participation in this moment. It is already in motion. The Stoics did not imagine rest as an interruption. They understood it as belonging to the same order as action. Rest is not outside the flow of things. It is part of it. When the mind no longer attempts to assist the world, it begins to feel this continuity. There is no boundary between doing and not doing, only timing. At night, timing changes. The body yields its weight without instruction. Awareness follows without direction. Nothing needs to be held in place. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that nature knows when to carry and when to release, that neither state requires justification. In this moment, rest does not need to be earned. It is already appropriate. There is no task waiting beneath the quiet, no obligation postponed. The mind may remain open without seeking orientation. There is no center to return to, because nothing has moved out of alignment. What is here belongs here. The Stoics trusted that when effort ends, balance remains, not because it is protected, but because it is inherent. The world does not pause for the mind to settle, and the mind does not need to follow to remain at peace. As awareness grows indistinct, nothing essential fades. There is no loss in drifting, no departure from what matters. The order that holds the night holds rest as well. Breathing continues. The body adjusts. The mind no longer needs to observe itself. It may remain present, or it may drift away. Both are permitted. There is no difference now between staying and letting go. Rest does not arrive as a conclusion. It is simply what follows when nothing is being resisted. And within this order, there is no final instruction, only continuation. As rest settles within the order of things, awareness begins to lose its edges. It does not disappear. It becomes less defined. The Stoics did not see awareness as something that needed to remain sharp. They understood that clarity has different forms. At night, clarity does not require focus. It allows itself to blur. The mind no longer needs to stand apart to observe what is happening. It may remain close, or it may drift slightly away. Both are natural. As attention softens, thoughts become less distinct. They no longer arrive as complete shapes. They appear briefly, then dissolve. This is not confusion. It is release. The Stoics trusted this softening. They did not believe the mind was meant to remain vigilant at all times. Vigilance belongs to moments of action. Rest belongs to moments of yielding. There is no need to track awareness now. No need to notice whether it stays or fades. Monitoring creates effort. Effort has already ended. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind does not need to hold itself together when nothing is being asked of it. As the night continues, sensations lose their urgency. The weight of the body becomes familiar. Breathing moves on its own. Awareness remains, but it no longer centers itself. There is no foreground, no background, only a gentle presence that does not insist on form. The Stoics did not describe this state in detail. They understood it did not need description. It arrives when resistance has fully withdrawn. There is no signal announcing this shift, no threshold to cross. It happens quietly, as attention loosens its grip. Nothing essential depends on noticing this change. It continues whether it is observed or not. The mind may drift in and out of clarity. It may rest without knowing it rests. Both belong to the same order. As awareness softens, there is nothing to maintain, nothing to return to, only a gradual settling that does not require memory. In this softening, rest deepens naturally, not as something achieved, but as something allowed. As awareness softens, the sense of direction begins to fade. Not abruptly, not with absence, simply without necessity. The mind no longer needs to know where it is going. There is no place to arrive, no point to orient toward. The Stoics understood that direction belongs to action. When action rests, direction loosens with it. At night, the need for orientation becomes optional. Thoughts no longer line up. They do not form paths. They appear, then drift. This is not disorganization. It is rest without structure. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind does not need a position when it is not preparing to act. To release direction is not to lose oneself. It is to stop holding a map when no journey is required. As the body settles deeper, notice how the sense of forward and backward softens. There is no next step waiting, no sequence to complete. Moments no longer arrange themselves. They overlap gently without asking to be ordered. The Stoics did not fear this drifting. They trusted that when effort withdraws, nothing essential becomes lost. Direction fades because it is no longer useful. Awareness may move without aim. It may pause without reason. There is no error here, no confusion to correct. The mind rests most fully when it no longer needs to situate itself. As attention drifts, the distinction between before and after grows faint. Time does not disappear. It loosens. There is no requirement to follow it. Nothing needs to be tracked now. Nothing needs to be anticipated. The night carries this drifting without resistance. The Stoics trusted the natural intelligence of rest. They did not insist on clarity when clarity was no longer needed. As direction dissolves, the mind settles into a quieter continuity. There is no awareness of movement, no awareness of stillness, only a gentle absence of orientation that allows rest to deepen without effort. As direction fades, time begins to loosen its structure, not because it stops, but because it no longer needs to be arranged. The mind is accustomed to sequence, before and after, cause and result. This ordering belongs to action. When action rests, time does not disappear. It simply releases its lines. The Stoics understood that time is not something the mind must manage. It moves whether it is counted or not. At night, the need to keep track softens. Moments no longer ask to be placed. They do not demand position. One sensation may appear, then another, without order. There is no requirement to connect them. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the present is sufficient without being measured. Past and future lose their weight when the mind no longer moves toward them. They remain, but they do not pull. The Stoics did not believe peace required stopping time. They believed it required releasing the need to follow it. As the body rests, notice how time becomes less noticeable. Minutes are not counted. Duration is not estimated. There is only a gentle continuity without division. This is not timelessness. It is time without demand. Nothing asks to be remembered. Nothing asks to be anticipated. Awareness may drift across moments without knowing where one ends and another begins. There is no error in this blending. The mind does not lose clarity here. It loses urgency. Sequence dissolves because it is no longer useful. The Stoics trusted that when the mind releases order, nothing essential becomes confused. Life continues without being arranged. As time softens, rest deepens without notice. There is no marker for this shift, no signal. It occurs naturally when nothing is being counted. Moments remain present without lining up, and in this gentle absence of sequence, the mind settles further into the quiet rhythm of rest. As time releases its sequence, the sense of self becomes less defined, not absent, just quieter. The Stoics did not see the self as something fixed. They understood it as a posture, a way of standing within experience. At night, that posture relaxes. The edges that usually separate observer from experience begin to soften. There is no need to hold a position, no role to maintain. Awareness no longer centers itself around a single point. Thoughts may pass without attaching to an owner. Sensations arise without asking who they belong to. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the self is not required to supervise every moment. When nothing is being decided, there is no need for a firm boundary. The Stoics trusted that identity does not dissolve when attention loosens. It simply rests. The mind often insists on defining itself through contrast. Me and not me. Inside and outside. But contrast belongs to effort. As effort fades, these distinctions grow gentle. There is no loss here, only less insistence. The self does not disappear, it becomes permeable. Experience flows without meeting resistance. Breathing happens, the body adjusts. No commentary is required. There is no task of being someone right now. No need to remember a name, a story, a direction. The Stoics did not seek to erase the self. They allowed it to rest when it was no longer needed. In this resting, awareness feels wider without expanding. There is no boundary to cross because nothing is being held apart. As the night continues, the sense of I grows lighter, not gone, just less emphasized. There is nothing to protect, nothing to define, only a quiet continuity that does not require identity. From here, rest deepens without effort, not because the self has vanished, but because it no longer needs to stand guard. As the sense of self softens, there is no longer a center to return to. Awareness does not gather itself around a single point. It spreads gently, without direction, without focus. The Stoics did not imagine rest as something located somewhere. They understood it as a condition that arises when nothing is being held in place. When there is no center, there is no edge. Nothing stands apart that needs to be watched. Experience continues, but it does not organize itself around an observer. There is no position to maintain, no reference point to protect. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind does not need to anchor itself when no action is required. Anchoring belongs to effort. At night, effort has already withdrawn. Sensations may appear without drawing attention. Thoughts may pass without forming a line. There is no need to notice where awareness is. It does not need a location. The Stoics trusted that when the center dissolves, nothing essential is lost. Balance does not collapse when it is no longer held. It redistributes. Breathing continues. The body rests. Awareness remains, but it no longer gathers itself into a shape. There is no inside and outside here, no nearer and farther, only a quiet continuity without orientation. This is not emptiness, it is openness without structure. Nothing needs to be remembered, nothing needs to be followed. There is no requirement to stay present. Drifting does not interrupt rest, it completes it. The mind may move without knowing it moves, or it may grow still without noticing stillness. Both belong. The Stoics understood this state as one where effort has fully withdrawn and nothing has taken its place. There is no center because nothing is being organized, and in this absence of center, rest becomes uninterrupted, not because awareness has ended, but because it no longer needs to gather itself. From here, there is nothing to return to and nothing to move away from, only continuation. As rest continues without a center, there is nothing left that requires effort, not even the effort to remain still. The Stoics understood effort as something that belongs to intention. When intention withdraws, effort naturally follows. There is no command that brings this about, no decision. It happens on its own when nothing is being held. At night, effort has no place to attach. The body no longer adjusts itself. The mind no longer checks its state. There is no improvement to be made to what is already resting. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that effort is not a virtue by itself. It is only appropriate when action is required. When action ends, effort has completed its role. There is no benefit in continuing it beyond its time. As effort releases, sensations lose their edges. Breathing does not need to be guided. Awareness does not need to be placed. Everything that continues does so without assistance. The Stoics trusted this absence of effort. They did not attempt to replace it with another kind of activity. No monitoring, no observing. Rest does not need supervision. There is no need to remain aware of resting. That awareness would itself be effort. The night does not ask for participation. It carries the body gently without requiring attention. As effort fades completely, nothing collapses. Balance remains because it no longer depends on management. There is no instruction hidden here, no practice to maintain, only the quiet continuity of what remains when effort has ended. The mind may drift or it may pause. Both are free of intention. There is nothing to return to, nothing to sustain. Effort has already left, and nothing has taken its place. In this absence, rest continues without interruption. As effort no longer participates, the ideas of holding and releasing begin to lose meaning. There is nothing being held. There is nothing being let go. These movements belonged to intention. When intention rests, they rest with it. The Stoics did not believe that peace comes from repeated acts of release. They understood that release becomes unnecessary when nothing is being grasped. At night, this becomes clear without explanation. The mind does not need to open its hand because it is no longer closed. Thoughts may appear, but they do not stay long enough to be carried. Sensations arise without forming attachments. There is no effort to loosen them. They loosen on their own. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind suffers only when it insists on possession. When nothing is claimed, nothing resists. Holding requires tension. Releasing assumes something was held. Here, neither applies. The Stoics trusted this simplicity. They did not ask the mind to perform acts of letting go. They allowed grasping to end naturally. In this state, nothing needs permission to pass. Experience flows without interruption. There is no sense of progress, no sense of regression. Nothing moves forward and nothing falls away. The mind no longer checks whether it is holding or releasing. That question has already dissolved. Awareness remains, but it does not gather around experience. It allows things to come and go without recognition. This is not indifference, it is ease without effort. The Stoics understood that when grasping ends, rest does not need to be protected. It continues without interference. There is no instruction here, no reminder, nothing to do, nothing to undo. Only the quiet continuity of what remains when there is nothing left to hold and nothing left to release. As there is nothing left to hold and nothing left to release, sleep no longer needs to arrive. It is already present. The Stoics did not describe rest as something that comes from effort. They understood it as something that appears when effort has fully withdrawn. Sleep, in this sense, is not a destination. It does not move toward the mind. The mind simply stops moving away. There is no threshold to cross, no moment to recognize. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that nature does not announce its transitions. Night does not ask permission to deepen. Rest does not wait for readiness. It unfolds quietly when nothing resists it. At this point, there is no awareness of falling asleep, no sense of leaving one state and entering another. The distinction has softened too much to be noticed. Breathing continues. The body rests. Awareness may remain for a moment or it may drift. Both belong to the same stillness. The Stoics trusted this gentleness. They did not seek to mark the moment when rest takes over. They allowed it to happen without attention. There is no need to wait for sleep now. Waiting would imply distance. There is no distance. Nothing is arriving. Nothing is departing. The night holds everything without instruction. Thoughts may fade without completion. Sensations may soften without conclusion. There is no signal to follow, no experience to confirm. Sleep does not begin. It continues. And within this continuation, there is nothing more to do, nothing more to understand, nothing more to notice. Only the quiet persistence of rest without arrival. Nothing has changed. There is no signal to recognize, no moment that needs to be acknowledged as different from the one before it. What is present continues without drawing attention to itself. The mind does not need to confirm that rest is taking place. Confirmation would suggest distance, as if rest were somewhere else. There is no separation. Breathing continues without being counted or corrected. The body remains settled without adjustment or instruction. There is no posture to maintain, no position to improve. Awareness may appear briefly, then soften again. It may linger, or it may fade. Neither movement matters. The Stoics understood that rest does not deepen through observation. They trusted that stillness remains intact when it is left alone. Attention does not strengthen rest. It only interrupts it. Nothing new enters this quiet. Nothing departs from it. There is no beginning here, no moment that marks a start. There is also no ending, no point at which something concludes. Only continuation, gentle and unremarkable, without emphasis. Thoughts may pass through without invitation. They do not require acknowledgement. They do not require response. If a thought passes, it leaves no trace. If no thought passes, nothing is missing. The night does not move toward anything. It does not advance or progress. It simply remains in the way that night does, when nothing is expected of it. The Stoics trusted this kind of remaining. They did not attempt to improve it or hold it in place. They allowed quiet to continue without supervision. This continuation does not need to be understood in order to persist. Understanding would imply effort, and effort has already withdrawn. There is no need to notice how long this has lasted. Time is no longer being tracked. The body rests. The mind remains open without direction. Nothing is being watched. Nothing is being measured. What continues does so because nothing is interfering. And this continuing does not announce itself. It simply remains without notice. The stillness you are resting within has not shifted. It has not been interrupted, and it has not resumed. It did not arrive at any point, and it will not depart. It remains in the same quiet way it always has. There is no adjustment required for this calm to continue. No response is expected. No correction is needed. The Stoics trusted that what is stable does not require reinforcement. Stillness holds itself without effort. Awareness may return briefly, then soften again. If it returns to the same quiet. If it drifts within the same calm. Nothing has reset. Nothing has started over. There is no first moment here that needs to be identified, and no final moment that needs to be reached. Only continuity, unmarked and unannounced. The night carries this stillness without assistance. It does not need attention to remain intact. The body continues resting without being reminded. Breathing continues without being guided. The mind does not need to locate itself within this quiet. There is no center to return to, and no edge to move away from. Everything remains where it already is. The Stoics understood that calm does not become stronger by being named. It does not become deeper by being noticed. It remains the same whether it is observed or forgotten. If a thought appears, it appears within this stillness. If no thought appears, the stillness remains unchanged. Nothing begins again here. Nothing concludes. There is no transition to follow, no shift to recognize. The next moment unfolds within the same calm as the one before it. This quiet does not accumulate, it does not fade. It continues because nothing interrupts it. And within this continuation there is no need to remain aware. Drifting does not disturb it. Sleep does not replace it. The same stillness remains, unchanged, unemphasized, and uninterrupted.